Hey guys, this is George. I'm going to go over how to use the timeline with the custom pivot table reports in George's Budget for Excel version 14, which is what I'm using now. And this also applies to George's Excel Checkbook Register version 7. Currently, I'm in the account summary. All the transactions that you enter into the different registers gets automatically updated in the reports. So let's go to that custom pivot table reports. Click Reports and Charts up here. Then click Custom Reports. And this is the default layout for the reports. It's the income versus expenses and your net amount on a monthly basis. Now I entered data for the year 2019 and 2020 for this particular example, and you can see that data here. That's a nice thing about these custom reports is that you can see multiple years, get totals for those multiple years, both on a monthly basis and the yearly total. And let's look at 2020. There's your months. There's the total for the year of 2020. And then the grand total is the total of those 2 years combined. You can click on these plus and minus arrows just to see the totals of the years and the grand total of those 2 years. So you can compare those years side by side. So I'm going to expand those. So if you had 10 years here, this custom pivot table report would show all that data. And it would also show future data transactions if you were to enter those in the registers. But what if we wanted to narrow that data down? So the way we do that is using these timelines. So that's this information right up here. So up here, you're going to click the period that you want to filter by. And we'll start with the biggest time period, years. So we entered 2 different years here. So let's say that we just want 2020 data. All we do is we select that year. And the nice thing about these timelines is you can visually see what filter is applied to your data. So you look at the data now, it's just for the year 2020. If we want 2019, you can see that that data changed here to 2019, and you can visually see the filter that is applied. If you want to clear that filter, just click here to click Clear Filter. Now we could filter by quarters. And let's say that we wanted fourth quarter of 2019. By clicking that, you can see right here the October, November, December of year 2019. We can also do multi-quarters. So let's say quarter 3 and 4 of year 2020. So there is third quarter and fourth quarter of year 2020, the total of those 2 quarters, and then the grand total. So let's go ahead and clear that filter. Now you can also filter by months. So let's say that we want 2 months here, May and June in the year 2020. You can filter just on those months, or maybe you just want 1 month, October of 2020, and there's October of 2020. Let's go ahead and clear that filter and show all of the data. What's really neat about this timeline is that you could filter by days. So let's say that you want to do either daily reporting or weekly reporting or biweekly reporting to see how you're doing in terms of your income versus your expenses. You could do that here. So let's say that we wanted to see the first 14 days of January 2020. So I would just click here and scroll over the data. And that is the income versus expenses for the first 14 days. So basically a bi-weekly report. You can also do 7 days if you want. So that's a really neat feature. And you can see here in this particular report that our expenses were greater than our income by $436. So let's clear that report. So the great thing about these timelines is that they're all visually oriented so you can specifically see what you filtered on. The old way of filtering is you would have to use these drop-down boxes here. So let's say I wanted to filter on 2020. So when you look at this data here, you really don't know what filter was applied on it if you use this old method, unless you were to go here and specifically look at the filter down here. 2020 was checked off. So let's clear that and compare that to the new way. using the timeline. There's years, select 2020. I could look at my data, I could look at this timeline and see that this just applies to the year 2020, but I can also see that I have additional data there when I clear this filter, or I can see that there's a grayed out year 2019. So if I clear it, I can see all of the data. Now, another way to lay out your timelines is if you use them a lot, you could add more timelines. So to insert another timeline, you select inside your pivot table, you go to Pivot Table Analyze, you go to Insert Timeline, select Date, click OK, and we have another timeline. We're going to just adjust this a little bit here, and that's how you can resize it, is by grabbing these ends here and adjusting the size. So that's how you add a new timeline. If you want to change the color of that timeline, you select the timeline, go up here to Timeline, and click one of the new colors. So let's make that orange. So let's add one more timeline. I want to show you a different way. You could select this timeline. You could right-click, copy, and you could click Paste. So that's another way to get a timeline. So now we have three timelines that are tied to this pivot table data. Now what we're going to do is we're going to change each of these to a different time period. We're going to use months for this one. We'll use years for this one. And we'll use quarters for this one. Okay, so what this is going to allow you to do is quickly flip between the different time periods without having to select all of these. You can do another one here for days, but let's just say that we use these three time periods mainly, years, quarters, and months. So to change the heading or the title for the timeline, select the timeline, go up here to where it says timeline, and then we're going to call this months. Click enter. On this one, we're going to call this years. And on this last timeline, we'll call this one quarters. So this will allow us to very quickly switch between different time periods without having to click the drop down here. So if you want 2020, you can click that. If you want quarter 2 in 2020, you can click that. If you want October of 2020, you can click that. And you can see down here the data is switching. Up here, when you have all three up here, notice that if you select a month, just a single month, it will show you that just a portion of that year has been selected, and also the quarter. Okay, so if I select these 3 months, you've got a portion of that one selected, and this one, you've got a combination of 2 quarters selected there. So that's a quick way, or a fun way, if you're somebody that wants to quickly navigate through different time periods in your data. You can set up multiple timelines that are all linked to each other and the data. And once you clear any one of them, it will clear all of the others. So if I clear this one, all of the timelines are cleared. And there's another setting in the timeline that we need to adjust, and that's a situation where the column widths might change when you refresh the pivot table. Notice how the timeline shifted over with the change in the column width. So in order to prevent that, first of all, let's undo this column width that I just did. So to prevent that from happening, select the timeline, right-click, and at the bottom there where it says Size and Properties, click that. And there's 3 settings here. The one we're going to adjust is the Properties one. And then you're going to click where it says Don't Move and Size with Cells. Select that one. You can close that. And now if we adjust the width of this column, that particular timeline will not shift with it. So let me undo that column width change. So that will prevent that issue from happening by changing that setting. And I quickly wanted to show you that you can future date a transaction. So we have 2019 and 2020 data here. So if I go back to the account summary, if I go to this Chase checking here, and if I insert a transaction, now the current date is 2021, but let's say I entered a transaction here for 1/1/2030, just for example's sake. If you want to project, typically you're going to be projecting the very next year, but I'm just going to use a far out year for this example. So let's say that we're going to do job income and check salary, 1,500. Okay, so with that transaction entered, let's go to the custom reports. Let's go to custom reports and let's scroll over here. We got 2019, 2020, and we entered 1,500 in this item here for salary, and you can see that information right there in the total. So you can actually enter future dated transactions, and those will show up in this particular custom reports. It won't show up in the other reports, but they will show up in these custom pivot table reports. And if you look up your timeline, let's go to the years, and as you can see 2020, but because we added 2030, if we scroll all the way here, there's 2030. We can select that, and we can see that that transaction right there has been added to this pivot table report. So let's go ahead and clear that. So that's an overview of how to use timelines with the custom pivot table reports. And if you would like to find out more information about the product, there will be a link in the description below the video, which you can click, and that will take you to my website at buyexceltemplates.com.